Protests in London turned violent Sunday as protesters and police clashed near Downing Street. Officers were seen pushing and using their batons, with some even punching and grabbing protesters as they approached the line of police. People were scattered between three areas: Parliament Square, Whitehall and Downing Street, while protesters could be seen in videos on social media climbing walls, statues and traffic lights. This comes as activists filled public spaces in huge numbers for the second consecutive weekend to commemorate the death of George Floyd and demand an end to systemic racism, staging die-ins outside US embassies and even tearing down a statue of a former slave trader in the British town of Bristol. In London, Rome, Madrid, Warsaw, Sydney, Hong Kong and countless other cities, protesters packed streets that have laid deserted for months to tell governments around the world that Black Lives Matter. Some defied coronavirus lockdowns and warnings from politicians to do so. Many protesters wore masks during the weekend's rallies, while some carried messages that racial inequality is also a public health crisis. They marched in solidarity with tens of thousands in the US, whose protests on Saturday were the biggest yet since video of Floyd's death at the hands of a white police officer ignited a wave of anger and action. But they turned out to draw attention to racial injustice in their own nations too. In London, thousands congregated outside the US Embassy on Sunday despite British ministers saying that public protests ran the risk of increasing the spread of COVID-19. Chants of "No justice, no peace and Black Lives Matter" bounced off the building in the Vauxhall region of the city, with a jubilant atmosphere for much of the day. Together, we will let our voices be heard. Enough is enough. Black people cannot keep suffering, one protester addressed the crowd. At times, the activists chanted "The UK is not innocent." Others had messages for the US president, with one sign reading, "Black lives trump your ego, Mr. President." The previous day, activists had descended onto Parliament Square in the center of the city. Protests were peaceful for several hours, but turned heated in the evening when police and crowds faced off outside Downing Street. In one incident, video posted online showed a police horse suddenly bolting, causing its officer to crash into a street light and fall to the ground. The loose horse then caused panic as it ran through groups of protesters before making its way back to police stables. "I stand with you. George Floyd's brutal killing must lead to immediate and lasting change everywhere," London Mayor Sadiq Khan said in a Sunday message to protesters, while condemning the minority who turned violent and reminding activists to try to limit physical interactions. A number of Boris Johnson's government ministers had previously urged protesters to avoid gathering at all for public health reasons, with Home Secretary Priti Patel saying on Saturday, "I would say to those that want to protest, please don't." Similar protests took place in Edinburgh, Scotland, and a dramatic scene unfolded in Bristol, southwest England, where activists tore down a statue of 17th century slave owner Edward Colston. Please subscribe my YouTube channel.